Welcome back to today's commentary section. Lithuania, a small country on the Baltic coast with a population of less than 3 million, has just taken an action that has left all of Europe holding its breath. It unilaterally tightened the strategic cargo transport route from Russia to Kaliningrad. This is not a typical sanction. It is a stranglehold on the only supply line connecting Russia's exclave of Kaliningrad to the rest of the country via rail and road through Lithuanian territory. And when the flow of goods is cut off, a heavily militarized region suddenly finds itself suffocated. But what is even more noteworthy is the reaction from Moscow. For the first time in many years, Russian lawmakers have officially mentioned reconsidering the legality of Lithuania's independence, citing legal loopholes from the Soviet era. This is not just an economic or political response, it is a legal strike with the power of a righteous bomb. A cold but precise blow that threatens the very existence of a nation on the international stage. Lithuania, from a position of provocation, suddenly finds itself having to prove its legal existence. Is this a new kind of war where the weapons are no longer missiles or tanks, but treaty clauses, diplomatic notes, and signatures from decades ago? And does Lithuania truly dare to challenge the Russian bear alone, or is there a familiar director behind it from across the Atlantic? In this video, we will peel back the layers of events, the layers of conflict, and the hidden blows wrapped in legalese to understand why the confrontation between Russia and Lithuania is not merely a dispute over a transport route, but a test for the entire geopolitical order in Europe. This is a game where one wrong move could cause a nation to disappear from the world stage. And you won't want to miss any details in this special analysis. Kaliningrad, a name once forgotten by the world, has now become a focal point in the European conflict map. After Lithuania's slap, all eyes are on this peculiar land, which has no direct border with the rest of Russia but serves as Moscow's steel finger right into the heart of NATO. Geographically isolated but strategically connected, Kaliningrad is not just a province, it is a fortress. A military foothold that could suffocate the entire Baltic region if necessary. And because of this, the West cannot afford to be complacent whenever this territory stirs. It is no coincidence that NATO remains highly vigilant regarding Kaliningrad. Within this area, smaller than the province of Nagihan, Russia has deployed crucial assets. The Iskander missile system, capable of carrying nuclear warheads, can reach Berlin in just a few minutes. The S-400 air defense system, one of the most sophisticated, can neutralize any flying object from the Western Alliance if it approaches the border. Not to mention the Baltic naval base, which does not merely serve a defensive role but is ready to deploy an offensive fleet within hours. Kaliningrad is not just a soft underbelly, it is a sword hanging over Europe. And that is why Lithuania, with tacit encouragement from external forces, is targeting Kaliningrad. Not merely for a few blocked shipments but because they want to isolate and paralyze this Russian stronghold. By cutting off the main transport route, they believe Russia will panic. But they forget that Russians are accustomed to living under pressure. They forget that Kaliningrad was once the birthplace of the most bizarre logistical strategies during the Soviet era, and to this day, Moscow has never abandoned it. One thing the West always wants to hide is that they fear Kaliningrad. Fear how Russia could reach out to Warsaw, Vilnius, and Berlin within hours if necessary. They fear how a geographically isolated territory can influence the entire NATO strategy. And they fear even more when they see that Russia does not tremble in the face of the blockade but is quietly preparing something bigger. Because since 2022, every tightening from NATO has only made the Russians colder, more stubborn, and wiser in their responses. Kaliningrad is silent. But that silence is not weakness, it is preparation. Moscow is determined not to lose this territory, and for LVA, touching it is akin to striking at the very nerve center of Russia's strategic framework. No one touches it without facing a response. LVA has stepped onto the chessboard. But do they realize they are playing with fire? In the next part, we will see that the weapon Russia has chosen is not missiles, but legal provisions. And that is what makes the opponent tremble the most. Kaliningrad is as still as the sea before a storm. Yet beneath the surface of Russia, an undercurrent is rising, not with missiles or tanks, but with sharp legal clauses. After Litva tightened transport into Kaliningrad, it seemed that Moscow would retaliate with sanctions or military action. But no, Russia chose a different path, challenging the legal status of the very nation that provoked them. This move left all of Europe bewildered, while the elite in LVA felt as if they were sitting on a powder keg. In the Russian State Duma, Deputy Evgeny Theodorov shook the assembly with a simple yet chilling question. Litva declared independence in 1990, but was that process legal according to the Soviet constitution? After a series of references, he concluded that there was never a nationwide referendum in the Soviet Union regarding Litva's departure from the bloc. There was no legal process for secession. This means that Russia's recognition of Litva's independence later became a political goodwill gesture rather than a binding legal obligation. This is the biggest twist in the confrontation. Litva lacks a legal divorce certificate from the Soviet Union. If this is escalated, it could put the entire foundation of their nation at risk. Without firing a single bullet, Russia could simply withdraw its recognition, and the world would have to confront the reality that Litva could be seen as a legal entity that was never truly independent in a procedural sense. A whole nation's existence is called into question, and what shocks LVA is not just Theodorov's statement but Moscow's calculated silence. Neither denying nor affirming, but allowing the entire press system and international legal experts to begin debating. This strike from Russia is a blow to the mind, not to muscle, a calm yet powerful move. And it reveals something deeper. Russia is prepared for every scenario, including the possibility of reversing the legal status of former Soviet states if necessary. This is not the first time Moscow has used legal weapons as a strategic tool, but with LVA, it is particularly dangerous because this nation has placed itself in the weakest position. A provocateur without a solid legal backing. And when Russia strikes, not only LVA is affected. The entire Baltic region, and even NATO, must reconsider definitions that have seemed immutable for 3 decades. In the game that Russia has drawn, the strongest card is sometimes not a missile but an old seal that has never been stamped. And that is what keeps the opponent awake at night. After being hit by Russia's legal maneuver that called into question the entire foundation of their nation, Litva did not retreat but continued to play a more daring game. They did not respond with words but chose a cold yet dangerous weapon. An economic blockade, slicing through like a knife. No shocking statements, no decisive blows, just layers of goods, each type being deliberately halted. Initially, it was alcohol and cement, then wood, followed by industrial chemicals. Most recently, Litva targeted the lifeblood of Leningrad, fuel, coal, and oil. A silent strike, but enough to start cracking any closed economic system. What is remarkable is that Litva executed this plan not recklessly. They measured each step, each reaction from Moscow. With every new round of sanctions introduced, they paused to listen. If Russia responded lightly, they took another step forward. If Russia remained silent, they added a few more percentages. A form of indirect provocation, but extremely dangerous. This strategy is known among political analysts as the sausage strategy. It involves cutting off small pieces that are not enough to provoke war, but when accumulated, can lead to a comprehensive crisis. And that is exactly what Lithuania is doing. Without firing a shot, they are tightening the supply lines crucial for Kaliningrad. However, what Lithuania does not understand, or chooses not to understand, is that they are facing a Russia that is accustomed to enduring hardship. Each time a land route is blocked, Russia strengthens its maritime logistics. Whenever a shipment is obstructed, there is immediately an alternative plan or simply an increase in strategic reserves within the Kaliningrad territory. Moscow's response is not one of anger but rather of determination and preparation. And that is what is truly frightening. An angry nation may react impulsively, but a patient nation is a far more dangerous adversary. From a strategic perspective, Lithuania's actions are not random. They are backed politically and psychologically, as no small nation would confidently position itself between Russia and the European Union without someone giving the green light from behind. But the problem is that every time they cut a slice of sausage, they are also slicing away pieces of their own flesh. The tighter they squeeze, the more the transport system delays. The more they blockade, the less competitive the internal logistics of the Baltic region become, and the more provocative it gets. Russia has all the more reason to respond comprehensively, not just to Lithuania but to the entire regional economic structure. What Lithuania thinks is cornering Russia is actually causing the Russian bear to step back to strike harder. Moscow is not reacting hastily, not out of weakness, but because it wants to prepare for a counterstrike that is deep enough and surprising enough to catch the opponent off guard. In the next section, you will see that Russia will no longer remain silent, for when resources are blocked and oil is cut off, that is when Russia will ignite the flame of a comprehensive response. When the last slice of sausage is cut, it will also be the moment the Russian bear abandons its silence. The last drops of patience have fallen from Moscow's hands, and in their place is a list of responses being hastily drafted by both the State Duma and the Federation Council. No more vague warnings. Now, there are ultimatums laid out clearly, sharply, and with no turning back. Russia declares that if Lithuania continues to provoke, all treaties, all borders, and all post-Soviet agreements will be reconsidered from scratch. Many initially thought this was just a strategic threat, but official statements from top lawmakers have left all of Europe in silence. In the Duma, representatives proposed not only a comprehensive economic blockade against Lithuania but also called for reconsidering the recognition of the current borders between the two countries. In the Federation Council, there were even suggestions to declare all bilateral treaties with Lithuania null and void since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. This is no longer about blocking railways or goods. This is a direct slap in the face to national honor, and Russia has decided not to turn the other cheek. For the Russians, Kaliningrad is not just land. It symbolizes survival amidst encirclement, the last bastion if the West wishes to advance further eastward. And when that symbol is threatened, Russia's response will not merely be to protect its interests but to defend the dignity of a nation that has survived both the Great Patriotic War and economic blockades. No one has the right to threaten Russia's sovereignty, whether it is a large alliance or a small nation standing on someone else's shoulders. This political response is not a mere intimidation tactic. It is a reminder that all agreements have conditions, and all borders are drawn in ink but can be erased by will. Lithuania has turned a page they thought was old and ineffective. But if that page is burned by Moscow, it could take down an entire book that has existed since 1991. Ironically, Lithuania is providing the most legitimate reason for Russia to do so without needing to fire a shot. What is happening now is no longer a debate about goods or transport. It is a contest between pride and recklessness. When the pride of a nation is pushed to the brink, the response is no longer defensive but a redefinition of everything. Moscow has set the countdown clock. They are not in a hurry, but with each passing day, patience will transform into action. The next phase of this game will be a strike that is no longer symbolic but could fundamentally alter the economic structure of the Baltic region in an irreversible way. After Russia issued its ultimatum, the atmosphere across Europe seemed to freeze, but as all eyes turned to Moscow for a response, a question began to simmer and spread. Does Lithuania have the strength to confront Russia on its own, or is there a hand pulling the strings behind them? From strategic research rooms to Russian defense experts, all analyses point in two main directions. One is Washington, the other is Brussels. Regardless of which scenario is correct, Lithuania is not the player but rather a pawn pushed to the front of the board. One line of analysis asserts that this is the hand of the US. The Moscow Institute of International Relations cites recent actions from Washington, from increasing military presence in Poland to tough rhetoric regarding the Baltic region, all indicating a familiar pattern of pushing allies to the front lines to observe Russia's reactions and then shaping the next steps. Expert Vladimir Bruder from the Institute of Humanitarian Policy bluntly states that Lithuania is merely following directives from across the Atlantic, a scenario the US has employed in various places, provoking a small flashpoint to elicit a global response. However, the second line of thought is more nuanced. They argue that this is not just the US but a strategy involving the entire EU. A strategy that appears fragmented but is essentially aimed at using Lithuania as a tool to gauge Russia's reactions. Each time Russia responds mildly, the EU tightens the noose. If Russia reacts strongly, they will play the role of mediator. It's a psychological game. Expert Dmitry Belsky from the Russian Academy of International Relations observes that the EU does not need all its members to show their faces. They only need one small, compliant, and easily replaceable member. And Lithuania is the perfect pawn. The danger lies in the fact that Lithuania is playing the role of a sacrificial piece while believing it is the one holding the door. They trust that their actions will be fully protected by the EU. But history has repeatedly shown that when the game goes too far, countries like Lithuania are often the first to be left behind. Essentially, Europe cannot engage in a full confrontation with Russia just to protect a nation with fewer than 3 million people, located right next to the Russian border. And if there is a backlash, Brussels may only express deep concern before turning away. Russia sees this clearly, and in this chess game, Moscow is not in a rush to strike. They allow their opponent to dig deeper, revealing Lithuania as a tool, prompting the people of Lithuania to question who is truly in control of their fate. It is a strategy that disorients the opponent, erodes trust, and ultimately causes them to lose the initiative. In the next part, you will see what will happen to the logistics, trade, and survival of Lithuania's economy if Russia truly implements a comprehensive economic blockade. It will no longer be a diplomatic game. It will be a test of survival when the sacrificial pawn has entered the battlefield and the chessboard has taken shape. The only thing left is the counterattack. If Moscow decides to tighten the comprehensive economic blockade against Lithuania, combined with Belarus cutting off the remaining routes, what will occur will not just be a blow but a systemic collapse. Because, despite Lithuania's strong declarations of independence regarding sovereignty, its economy still heavily relies on its role as a transit point for goods from east to west. Thousands of containers that once passed through Lithuania each day will now have to change course or be stranded at the port. All logistics routes connecting Russia to Kaliningrad or Belarus to the sea will be severed. This is not just a bottleneck, it is a strangulation. Dozens of industries in Lithuania exist thanks to raw materials, components, or energy sources from the east. Once locked down, the supply chain shatters. Fuel fails to arrive on time, factories halt operations, fertilizers can't cross borders, and harvests are ruined. Major transport routes lose contracts, workers lose jobs, and within a few months, the unemployment rate could double. It is not Russia that poses a threat, but rather the market that will reflect the cost of provocation. Yet the surprises do not end there. The bigger twist is that LVA will not collapse alone. The other two Baltic countries, Latvia and Estonia, also depend on similar trade flows. The Baltic logistics system operates like an interconnected network. When one link breaks, the domino effect spreads throughout the region. If Russia and Belarus simultaneously tighten road access and cut off transit routes, all three countries will face unprecedented economic isolation since the Cold War. This is not a military blockade but isolation through market logic. One punch, three down. And the only one who doesn't need to lift a finger can sit back and watch the situation unravel: Russia. This scenario is not just media commentary. It has been discussed in closed sessions referenced by regional governors like those in Kaliningrad and simulated by Russian experts and policy reports. Moscow understands that they do not need war. They just need to touch the right weakness at the right time and in the right way. When that happens, Western public opinion will no longer see Lithuania as a victim but as a reckless player pushing the entire Baltic region into a pit of instability. If Russia retaliates, it will not be loud. There will be no public announcements, just a few quietly signed directives. A decree to close the borders, a halt on transport permits will be enough to abruptly stop the entire east-west corridor through the Baltics. And at that moment, it will not be Russia but the people in Vilnius, Riga, and Tallinn who will ask why they have to bear the consequences of a game they did not bet on. After painting a picture of the Baltic economy spiraling into chaos, Russia chose a response that left Western analysts perplexed. They did not launch immediate strikes, impose instant sanctions, mobilize troops, or deliver any threatening speeches. Instead, there was absolute silence. A calculated silence, one that made Lithuania feel more suffocated than if faced with a military response. In Russian strategic circles, this is not a delay but an art form, the art of psychological warfare. When the opponent does not know when the hammer will fall, they live in daily panic. They dare not push further, nor can they retreat. And that is the deadlock. It is at this point that Lithuania, despite not having faced any punitive strikes, begins to experience internal turmoil. In cabinet meetings in Vilnius, officials start questioning how Russia will respond, when it will happen, and whether there is an escape route. As one Russian expert put it, no one knows when the hammer will fall, and that is what is truly frightening. A visible punch can be dodged, but a punch hidden in the shadows causes every muscle to tense in anticipation. And Russia is using the opponent's heartbeat as a weapon. Meanwhile, in Kaliningrad, the region facing transport blockades is not in a state of panic. Rather, there is quiet preparation, and the ports are beginning to bustle again. Cargo ships from the north are being redirected. Light military signals are starting to appear, but not in an overt manner. It resembles a soldier cleaning his weapon, checking equipment, waiting for orders. No noise, no showmanship, but every action indicates that Russia is ready. This contrast is the strongest message. One side is anxiously waiting, while the other is silently reinforcing. That is true initiative. Russia does not need to respond to Lithuania verbally. They allow Lithuania to answer itself little by little each day through growing fear. A small country unilaterally initiating a game is now left waiting alone for the outcome. And perhaps that is why Moscow has yet to implement any specific measures. Sometimes, what causes an opponent to collapse is not the blow itself, but the pressure from the anticipation of that blow. In the following section, we will witness the stark reality of a painful truth. Lithuania has nothing to counter with. And when that happens, Russia will not need to attack. It will only need to tighten its grip one last time to completely close the remaining door on the small opponent by the Baltic Sea. While the adversary is still in a panic from the chilling silence coming from Russia, a question begins to echo through the corridors of power in Vilnius. What does Lithuania really have to lose if Russia truly retaliates? Unfortunately, the answer is not very little, but almost everything. Lithuania has chosen to roar like a tiger in the political forest of Europe. But what no one dares to say is that it is merely a thrashing tiger, and when the fire from the east ignites, that facade will burn faster than a diplomatic statement. The first thing Lithuania will lose is its right to self-determination. Every current move no longer originates from national interests but is a waiting game for reactions from NATO or Brussels. The so-called independence of action now exists only in name. And the more Lithuania provokes Russia, the more it ties itself tightly to external powers. Each sanction, each hard-line statement pushes Vilnius into a position with no way out. The more a country relies on NATO, the more it loses its national identity. And Lithuania is stepping into that trajectory step by step, without hesitation. But what is even more frightening is that Lithuania's position within Europe is also changing. From a vital link in Baltic trade, it is gradually becoming a political burden. Larger economies like Germany, France, and Italy do not want to take risks for a small country, especially as the risks of direct confrontation with Russia increase. When a crisis occurs, what the EU does best is express deep concern. But what they rarely do is provide actual assistance. Lithuania may be promised a few billion euros, some reconstruction programs, but nothing will be enough to compensate for the lost strategic position. And as the domestic economy begins to sink into crisis due to isolation from Russia, those promises will quickly fade. Worse still, Vilnius is making itself the first name to be forgotten if the conflict escalates. It is not a financial center, not a pillar of defense, and does not play a key strategic role like Poland. It is the ideal pawn, small, easily replaceable, and ready to be sacrificed. But when that pawn is lost, the game continues, just without it. Russia understands this, and instead of rushing to counterattack, it allows Lithuania to entangle itself. Every move by Vilnius does not weaken Russia but only undermines itself. They roar to demonstrate strength, but the more they roar, the more their facade tears, and eventually, even the most ardent supporters will have to admit that Lithuania cannot bear this game because, in the real power play, those who are the loudest are often the first to become victims. In the final part, you will see that the outcome of the flag waving is not an explosion but a legal declaration powerful enough to shake the very foundations of the nation. And the one rewriting the rules of the game is Russia. While everyone is still waiting for a fierce retaliation from Moscow, Russia chooses a direction that no one expects. There are no gunshots, no loud sanctions imposed. Instead, there is a line of text, a seal, a cold legal statement capable of sending the entire nation of Lithuania into turmoil. Russia does not need to destroy anything. It only needs to veto the very law that recognized Lithuania's independence. A simple procedural act, but one that carries the weight of an indictment. Because when a power like Russia questions the legality of a nation, it is no longer a bilateral dispute but an invitation for the whole world to engage in a dialogue that no one wants to face. The West once used international law to judge Russia. They relied on documents, clauses, and conventions to accuse, condemn, and isolate. And now, that very Russia is wielding that sophisticated weapon not to launch a counterattack but to expose the greatest paradox. How many countries are truly independent in a legal sense, or do they only exist because they are recognized in a favorable context? A handshake from years ago, a declaration of goodwill, a conditional silence, these can all be retracted. And when that happens, a country that is no longer seen as legitimate will see all its claims of sovereignty and international agreements gradually lose their value. LVA is no longer in a position of resistance but has fallen into a defensive stance. They must not only explain to their citizens but also to partners and international institutions that they remain a legitimate entity, that they are not alone, and that they still have a seat at the table. However, in a world where information and legal matters dominate, no bombs are needed. Just sowing the seed of doubt is enough to shake the system from within. And that is the art that Russia is employing, not to destroy, but to make its opponents collapse due to their own uncertainty. In an era where legitimacy is even more powerful than military might, whoever controls the legal narrative holds the upper hand. LVA thought they had provoked the Russian bear, but perhaps what they awakened was not anger, but the cold precision of a seasoned player. Which country do you think will be the next move in the game that Russia is rewriting the rules for? Share your thoughts, and if you want to stay updated with the most profound analyses of the rising multipolar world, don't forget to follow the Zeta Theory channel. Because in this game, the truth does not lie in the loudest places, but in the quietest and sharpest corners.